What is going on, guys? It's Modded Warfare here. Welcome back to another PS5 Jailbreak news update. And we have a huge update to cover here in this video. Some major piece of news that has come out. Not just news, but something tangible. Something that will really change the whole PS5 scene. A major step forward. And that is the fact that Slayer's Govey has managed to get PS4 fake packages running on the PS5. Now, this is specific to PS4 fake packages. Does not count for PS5 fake packages, anything like that. But basically all the stuff that we can run with a jailbroken PS4, we can pretty much run now on the PS5, on a jailbroken PS5. Now there are some caveats to that, obviously. Right now it's only for 4.03 firmware, and the fact that some of the PS4 homebrew apps don't work at the moment, there's some issues with those, and a few other things here and there that we'll get into. But for the most part, the stuff that you can run on a jailbroken PS4, you can now run on a jailbroken PS5, which is huge. That means full PS4 game backups, DLC, updates, that's all runnable. Backports we'll kind of get into, there's a few finicky things with those. PS2 games and PS1 games and the very limited PSP games that you can run on a PS4 through the software-based emulation that Sony introduced, where you can basically use those software-based emulators to compile a, emulated version of any PS2 ISO or PS1 ISO or PSP and try and run that on the PS4. You can now do that on the PS5 as well and run PS2 and PS1 games and limited PSP games on your PS5 as well. So all of that stuff is now possible. So how did this happen? Where's this all come from? So this all started with Slayer's Govey, who's been updating his PS4 jailbreak payloads repository on GitHub and adding some interesting stuff. Now, a few days ago, he added some extra code, and it was determined by quite a few people who were examining that he was trying to get PS4 fake packages running on the PS5. And it wasn't working at the time, which is why I didn't kind of make a big deal out of it or try and, make a video on it straight away when it wasn't working. However, he was updating that. A day later, he updated more of the code, and it looked like he was progressing. But then all of a sudden, I guess nobody really expected him to be done so quickly, but he managed to get it working, and that was just last night. So he managed to get it working, and we got a payload that was dropped on Twitter by Zekoshal. It may have been posted in a Discord by somebody else, but that's where I first saw it. Zekoshal posted it on Twitter. He basically said 4.03 homebrew enabler hen, courtesy of Slayer's Govey. He calls it the PS4 fake package enabler. Give it a shot. So you can now run this on your PS5. Now, in order to run it, you have to be using Slayer's Govey's exploit at the moment, which currently only supports 4.03, which is one of the reasons why it's limited to 4.03 right now. But you basically just head on to your internet browser. If you don't know how to set that up, I have a full tutorial showing you how to set up the PS5 jailbreak from start to finish, which shows you how to install the web browser app and get everything set up to block updates and everything. So definitely check out that video if you're wanting to get started. So you go to es7in1.site or any of the other exploit hosts that's hosting Slayer's Govey's exploit, and you want to head on over there, launch Slayer's Govey's exploit, and then obviously click the button for jailbreak plus netcat. Once you do that, if it works, it will eventually say waiting for payload. Obviously you get not enough free system memory errors, you just click OK to those. Eventually, if it doesn't crash or give you an error message, it will eventually take you to a notification that says waiting for payload. At that point, you can use netcat GUI on your computer or some other payload injector, and you want to just copy the payload that you downloaded, which will be linked in the video description. You copy that into netcat, and obviously you enter your PS5's IP address in the host box, port number 9019, because it's Slayer's Govey's exploit, it uses 9019 instead of 9020. So 9019 for the port number, and then you inject the payload, and that is it. You won't get any notification at the moment. It will just go to a not enough free system memory error after a few seconds, and then from there you can go ahead and exit out of the browser. And when you go into the settings and scroll down, you'll have the debug settings enabled. It is the patched version of the exploit that gives you the debug target ID, so you can install PS4 fake packages from the package installer by copying them to a USB drive, just like you do on PS4. And that's as simple as that. You install them and now you can run them, whereas you could not before. So I did get some information about this from Lightning Mods on how this payload actually works. Although, of course, a lot of it goes over my head, so I'll probably end up butchering this. So, yeah, my apologies to Lightning Mods in advance. So things do work differently to how they work on the PS4, where things are actually patched in the kernel. With this, everything is done in the payload itself. It patches shellcore, it decrypts the fake package file using a common key, because fake package files are actually encrypted, but they use a known key to decrypt. So they decrypt the fake package files, and then there's the self files, which are the executable files for the application. Just like how we have exe on Windows, we have self files on the PS4, and there's fake self files, which are basically decrypted self files on fake package files, whereas on retail package files, the self files are encrypted. So normally there's a decrypt function that handles the decryption of the self files. That has to be bypassed with the payload. Instead of trying to decrypt it, since it's already decrypted, the data can be directly fed to the necessary functions. So again, that's a very puddle deep explanation of things. There's also a pretty good article from Wololo that goes into a bit more detail on that you can go ahead and check out. I'll leave it in the video description. So another thing that I was interested in trying is backported versions of games, because of course, you can't run games on a PS4, on a 9.00 PS4, if the game requires a higher firmware in order to run. And so we have people like CYB1K, who's able to backport these games to get them to run on the older firmwares. So can we get those backports working? Now, the PS5 on 4.03 is basically the equivalent to 9.00 on the PS4. So any games that require higher than 9.00 are not going to run on the PS5 on 4.03. I tried installing a game that definitely requires a higher firmware to run. That was Resident Evil 4 Remake. Now, when I installed the original version of the game, it did not even install properly. I got an error message saying it would not install. And if you do install a game that requires a higher firmware than the firmware you're currently on in order to run, you will see that when you're not highlighting that game on the home menu, there'll be a red bar at the bottom of the application showing that it's not compatible or it's not properly installed. So it does not install it, and this is a pretty big issue because if the game does not install, you cannot patch it. So normally on the PS4 you would install a base version of a game that's not patched. So you would just install like Resident Evil 4 Remake, the base version of the game, which is not patched in any way to run on an older firmware, and it would install, but you wouldn't be able to launch it because you're on too low a firmware. So then you would install the backport patch, which would patch the game to run on the older firmware, and then you could run it. That doesn't work on the PS5, at least not right now. Maybe there's some way that this could be fixed, but at the moment that doesn't work because trying to install a game that requires a higher firmware to run will not actually allow it to install. And if the game is not properly installed, it cannot be updated with the backport patch. You cannot then install the backport patch on top because the original game is not installed properly in the first place and it does not patch it. So you run into this weird issue where, you're just getting error messages in the package installer when you're trying to install these backport patches. And the update cannot install because the game's not properly installed, and the game can't be installed because, requires a higher firmware. Now, there is a fix for this, but you have to do it manually. So what I ended up doing to actually get this game to run is I had to create a remastered package. So instead of having the base version of the game and then a separate update with the backport patch, I basically merged them into one package. So you just have the game package with whatever game update plus the backport patch all combined into one package file, into one game app package file, which is generally known as a remastered package, which means you install this one package file and you don't just get the game, but you get the update included as well. And that is basically how I had to do it: merge the backport update with the original game into one package file and install that. And after I did that, it did install successfully and I was able to run it. So backported versions of games do actually run. So I was able to get a game that normally would require a higher firmware on the PS5 and the PS4. I got that to run on the PS5 on 4.03. But unfortunately, there were issues with the sound. There was major audio distortion going on, a lot of problems there with the audio. And it's playable so far. I haven't actually tried to play through much of the game yet, so I don't know what other issues could pop up. But it's likely that these backport patches are probably going to have to be kind of edited or tweaked, just like how some backport patches need to be tweaked to work on even older firmwares. There's probably going to need to be a specific backport for PS5 in order to get these backports working properly on the PS5 without any kind of crashes or errors or bugs with audio and various other issues that could pop up. So hopefully that can be done. Maybe CYB1K can look into that, Cyber 1000, and we could maybe get these backports working properly on the PS5, which would be awesome. because then we can play all these newer games, even though they're not the PS5 version, they're the PS4 versions, but at least we could play them on our PS5s on our older firmwares of 4.03. Now, speaking of firmware versions, obviously there's a lot of concern right now about this only supporting 4.03 firmware. Now, I'm sure this will be ported to 4.50 and 4.51, as well as 3.0 all the way up to 4.51, just like we've had support for the WebKit exploit from Spectre, which I think originally only supported one firmware like 4.03, and then it was quickly updated to support 4.50, 4.51, and then 3.0 all the way through to 4.51. So it's likely the same thing will happen with this payload as well. The reason why 4.03 happens to be the one that got released is probably because that's the firmware that Slayers Govey happens to be running on his PS5, so it stands to reason that 4.03 is supported first. However, it can be ported to other firmware versions if we get help from the community, from people who are on these other firmware versions who can run some kind of test payload to get the updated offsets. Then we could get support for other firmware versions as well, most likely. There may be issues in this case because of execute-only memory and trying to find the offsets. I'm not entirely sure if his method for finding the offsets could be like automated via a test payload or something. It may be a bit more complicated than that, but we'll have to wait and see in that department. I'm pretty sure it can be ported to these other firmwares, but we'll have to wait and see if it's, you know, something that's fairly trivial or something that might be a little bit more challenging, but it can most likely be ported. I don't see any reason why 4.03 is the only firmware version that this can work on. I'm sure it can work on the other firmwares from 3.0 to 4.51 as well, but we'll have to wait and see how long that takes. So obviously this is a huge leap forward in terms of jailbreaking the PS5, being able to run PS4 fake packages, but there is more to come. We have Lightning Mods, who's working on native PS5 homebrew apps. He showcased that in early September with his test applications, his little Tetris application, which is a PS5 native homebrew application rather than using PS4 backwards compatibility. So that's being worked on in the background. We also have Flats, who has indicated his interest in getting fake packages working for PS5 fake packages, and that he might do a write-up on that if he gets that working. So that is stuff that is still to come. And don't forget that the Flow has also indicated some new bugs that he's discovered for a potential exploit on higher firmwares as well. So there's a lot happening. There's a lot of good news that has happened recently, and yeah, things are evolving very quickly. So that's it for this video. I've covered everything that I've been looking at so far last night and all the tests that I've been running. So I haven't had any sleep so far at all last night. It's what's the time? 10 o'clock in the morning. Unfortunately, these big releases always seem to happen kind of evening time US time, which for me is about 2 or 3 a.m. So I only find out about this stuff like in the middle of the night, which is obviously not great for trying to record videos and stuff at that time. And yeah, so if this video seems a little lower energy than usual, that's why. Or if there's any mistakes in this video when it goes out, that's why. So I apologize for that, but it's just the way these things are. Time zones are kind of awkward when it comes to big releases like this for me, but it is what it is. We work through it. And obviously I'll be doing videos covering all of this stuff fairly soon, tutorials showing you guys how to install your PS4 game backups, showing you how to install PS1 and PS2 games on the PS5, get those running. And I may also do a video about backports, about how to do the remastered package thing to get backports running. Although I'm not sure if that's entirely wise at this point with all the kind of issues that might pop up with that. But we'll have to wait and see. I might do a video on that as well. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. And once again, I'll hopefully see you guys in the next one.